everybody. Well, welcome. Thank you so much for coming out to the Monroeville Public Library this evening to hear our talk about the city steps of Pittsburgh. My name is Laura Zurowski, and this is
Matthew Jacob.
And we are two of the three co-authors of the book that is on the screen, City Steps of Pittsburgh, A History and Guide. Our third partner, Charles Suckup, who is the archivist for the city of Pittsburgh, was unfortunately starting to get under the weather this afternoon and felt that for everybody's health and well-being, it was much better not to participate this evening. So we will be covering his slides in detail as we go through. So we just like to always start off by telling the audience a little bit about who we are. Matt, would you like to start first?
Sure. So I'm Matthew Jacob. I'm a lifelong Pittsburgher, grew up in the East End. I worked at the city of Pittsburgh for about 10 years, and now I work for Pittsburgh Water. But my role in this book, I visited all of the city steps while I worked at the city, and so I had a lot of knowledge about that, and I primarily did the photography and the mapping in the book.
And Charles, who was not able to be with us this evening, is not necessarily a lifelong Pittsburgher, although his family has been in the Western Pennsylvania and Pittsburgh area for many generations. Charles is the head archivist for the city of Pittsburgh, and he's very well esteemed with research and all sorts of Pittsburgh history. And myself, I'm Laura Zurowski. I am not a native Pittsburgher. I'm actually from Providence, Rhode Island, and I moved to Pittsburgh 15 years ago and discovered the city steps. I live in a neighborhood that has lots of public stairs, and that was how I got very intrigued and very interested in wanting to learn more about this unique part of history. During the day, I am a technical writer at the University of Pittsburgh. So,
all right, so we're going to jump in. And so we like to get started here. Why does the city of Pittsburgh have so many city steps? So this will not come as a surprise to many of you, but the city of Pittsburgh is a very hilly city with quite drastic changes in elevation. From the lowest to highest points, it's about a 700-foot change in elevation within the city. And this is a topographical map of the city that the pink and red areas represent the highest elevations, whereas the green areas represent the flattest or lowest elevations. The highest elevations in the city are the southern neighborhoods as well as the northern neighborhoods. The highest point in the city limits is in the northern area of the city. And then the flattest areas would be the East End here. So keep this in mind. And the other thing to mention, of course, is that while Pittsburgh is both very hilly, but it's also an older city that, of course, predates the personal automobile. So people had to walk to work. And typically the people who were walking to work lived in the slopes or in the hills above where they were walking down to work. So city steps became a necessity to get people to and from their jobs. And keep this map in mind when we go to the next map on the next screen. So this is a map of the city steps in Pittsburgh. The red lines are the city steps, and as you can see, they correspond pretty closely to that previous map of all the pink and red areas. So the neighborhood with the most sets of city steps in the city would be the South Side Slopes here, but the southern neighborhoods like Beachview and Carrick and Brookline, as well as the northern neighborhoods like Observatory Hill, have quite a bit of steps as well. And then you can see that the East End, where it was flatter on the map, is where it gets a lot more sparse with city steps. So within the city of Pittsburgh, there are 66 neighborhoods that have city steps. When we say, and that's 66 of the 90 neighborhoods. When we say 90 neighborhoods, the city has 90 neighborhoods. Some of those neighborhoods are neighborhoods that we may collectively think of as one neighborhood. So Lawrenceville, for instance, is split into 3 different neighborhoods by the way the city designates them. And as we go throughout this presentation, keep in mind that these steps were built at a much different time in Pittsburgh's history. They were built, many of them were built in wood, over 100 years ago, but then they were reconstructed in concrete right after World War II for most of those steps. But they were also built at a time where the city's population in the city limits peaked at about 700,000 people. Today, within the city limits, there's about 300,000 people. So a much, much different time in the city's history when these were built. So we're going to get into Charles's slides. Charles is the archivist. He is the expert on these slides. So we're going to do our best to cover these and do his part of the presentation. But if there are questions later, we will again do our best to answer them, but we can also get you in touch with Charles or something if there's questions about these slides. So the City of Pittsburgh Archives, Pittsburgh has been around for 200 or so years. The city archives have been around since 2016. So there are hundreds of years of documents that were in no way archived or maintained properly until the city archives came along and went and collected all of these documents.
Now, it is important to note with all of this is that just because a Department of Archives didn't exist, it does not mean that the city of Pittsburgh was just like throwing all the paperwork out, right? Everything was being preserved. It just wasn't being archived to a level and a safety quality to ensure its preservation over the long term. So I think that's always an important thing, because sometimes people might think, oh, if there wasn't an archives, like were people hiding information or they were destroying it? And that is not the case at all. If information was there. If there was anything that happened, it was more of like environmental destruction, because the records were just being stored in basements or, buildings that didn't have climate control.
Yeah, and so the job of the archives was, one, to find a lot of these documents, but also try to preserve them. And some of them they were not able to preserve because they might have been in a basement that got flooded or something like that. So it's important work, and it's ongoing work. So a lot of the documents that they are able to digitize, they are working through digitizing hundreds and thousands of documents, of paper documents and pictures. But this became a great resource for us in the creation of this book. So, and we'll talk about this on later slides, but there are previous City Steps of Pittsburgh books by Bob Regan, who worked with us on this book and wrote the foreword. But he did not have access to this online archive at the time, and doing the research was a much more labor-intensive task. As a result of digitizing all these documents, Charles could search for city steps that are referenced within the documents, and we could find documentation of city steps dating back to even what we believe would be the earliest set of city steps, which are no longer around, but they were built on what is today Duquesne's campus. As you can see as well, this includes documentation as best as they could get from neighborhoods that are Pittsburgh neighborhoods today, but were separate municipalities a long time ago. So places like Birmingham, places like Allegheny City that were eventually annexed by the city of Pittsburgh.
Yeah. And one last thing to note with what you're looking at here is that one of the great things about if you're ever doing research, municipal research for something that's in the city of Pittsburgh, for every action that the city government took, there had to be a corresponding ordinance. So like with the city steps, for example, Charles was able, once these were all digitized, to easily find the corresponding ordinance that approved by city council, approved the construction and where it was going to go, and in some cases, who was going to build it. And that is something that is still true to today. The ordinances started way, way back, but still today, within the city of Pittsburgh, for every kind of municipal action that the city government is taking, there is a corresponding ordinance that supports it. So if you're ever looking to say like, oh, well, when this street was made or when this park was built, any sort of investment using taxpayer dollars, there would be an ordinance for it.
And so another valuable resource in doing research on not just city steps, but also the history of the city of Pittsburgh are these Sanborn fire insurance maps. And so these were created to document property values of different properties at the time. And if a fire or other disaster were to happen, they would have this documented here about how valuable the property was. However, these maps also did show at times city steps drawn into them. And so that was another very valuable resource for us in writing this.
They're also very beautiful.
They're also pretty.
To look at. Yeah, they're really
and
works
actually
of art.
The physical copies that Charles has seen in person, they didn't actually do new maps. They just pasted over new buildings on them, so they're like layered in different places as changes happen.
Yes.
Yeah, which is kind of interesting.
And Pittsburgh is a city that has changed so much. It really is a city of engineers, always moving things around, things moving up and down and around. So yeah, as a map maker, you never had a shortage of work.
Right, so these are steps that no longer exist. However, these are what were known as the Indian Trail steps that connected Carson Street to Grandview Avenue, right around where the modern-day Duquesne Incline is. It is rumored that they followed an old Native American trading path, so that is why they were named that. And as you can see from this picture, this is not the bottom of the steps, and you can not really see the top, but this is kind of where the top cuts off, but they went all the way to the top of this hill. They accounted total, they were over 1,000 individual steps. Today, in terms of the longest sets of steps we have, I think a few of them are about 300 or so steps, so they're much longer than any of the steps we currently have anymore. These steps no longer exist. They eventually went away as a result of the inclines. However, the inclines did come at a cost, right? So some people may have walked down the steps to work and then taken the incline back up, since that'd be easier. However, it is also rumored, this is something we were not able to confirm with any sort of actual archival documentation, but we like to include it as an anecdote. But it's rumored that the incline companies haunted the steps to try to convince people not to take them and to take the inclines. So, like I said, we're not promising that or putting our profession on it or anything, but
we have not found
anecdotally.
Yeah, any newspaper articles or anything there. But
urban legend.
Yeah. It's important to remember, though, is that with the inclines, when they existed, they were all private enterprises. It was a business. So it's not the same thing as PRT, regional transit, it's funded by taxpayer dollars or, the government or anything like that. The inclines were all private enterprises. So they operated only as long as they were profitable. And once they were not, they had no problem closing up shop. But getting people to spend those couple of cents to ride up or down.
And another thing that's striking about this picture is there's no trees. And so you're all probably familiar with Mount Washington and those hillsides. They are very green today, but a lot of the pictures from these time periods, there are very few trees. Right, so infrastructure back in the day was still a political issue, as it still is today. And we found it interesting in our research that during one prominent mayoral race within the city of Pittsburgh, the city steps were a hot button issue. And so Robert Waddell, who was a football coach at Carnegie Tech, now Carnegie Mellon, he ran for mayor, and he platformed a lot on infrastructure and did some photo ops on some dilapidated sets of steps. Robert Waddell, he ran against David Lawrence, who you all may know the name David Lawrence, so he did not win. But he did run a pretty strong campaign. He garnered, as a Republican, about, I think, 30 to 40% of the vote. So he ran a pretty strong campaign on these issues. And it's just to show that, this is an issue back then, and it is still infrastructure, of course, an issue today as well. So, after that mayoral race and after World War II, the city steps were reconstructed in concrete in mass, basically. There was many projects throughout the city after World War II that reconstructed these old, dilapidated wooden sets of steps into concrete. Many of these steps today that were reconstructed in concrete have not been reconstructed since. So if you're driving through the city and you see concrete steps, it is a very good chance that they were built in the 40s or the 50s. These steps, for instance, right here, they are still this construction today. In addition to that, and there are many reasons for why the steps are dilapidated, why they had to be rebuilt. One of those issues was that both in the Depression as well as during the war, whether it was economic hardship or lumber shortages, people would steal wood off of the steps and use it to heat their homes. And as a result of that, people would fall on the steps and they would sue the city. And the city was spending a lot of money both on repairing dilapidated steps, being sued, et cetera, et cetera. And of course, also there was a lot of federal funding that came to reconstruct the steps after the war. And in fact, this headline here, it's kind of hard to see, but it says at the top corner, firewood supply to go, which was what the wooden steps were considered for a time.
Yep. Okay. All right. So for those of you that are, if you're all here, we're assuming that you're interested in Pittsburgh's history. So whenever you are interested in, if you have a particular area that you're researching, it might be ancestry or family, tracing different neighborhoods or different things that have happened in the city, every week, there is new history at the Pittsburgh City Archives. So as Matt was mentioning earlier, the Pittsburgh City Archives is a relatively new department, but the city of Pittsburgh has been around for 200 years. So that means the archives has enormous amounts of information that they are in the process of digitizing, making available online, doing all of the different archival records that are necessary. So every week, it is a new storehold of information. So it is something that you can access the city archives. It's often it's a very long URL. So it's really just easiest to just Google Pittsburgh City Archives, and it'll take you right to the department's webpage, where you can then go on and do all different kinds of keyword searches. Maybe it's by a family member's name or a street or a neighborhood, and it'll bring up all kinds of information, ordinances, photographs, different kinds of maps. Correspondence is something that the City Archives has been very busy with compiling and storing. If you or any of your family members lived in the city of Pittsburgh over any period of time and ever wrote a complaint letter to city government or a city council person, it's in the archives, and that's something that is also available. You can type in your ancestor's name or your family member's name, and you can see, hey, look, Grandma there, she was really busy sending lots of letters complaining about those potholes on her street. Or, in this case, those wooden city steps that were broken, and she really wanted them fixed. In addition to all of that information, there's also a growing collection of photography from the Board of Viewers. So one of the things that had to be done throughout the city's history, and it's still done today, is that anytime work is being done, a road is being repaired, city steps are being repaired, maybe a house is being demolished, any sort of work, photographs have to exist, and this is often done for documentation and insurance purposes. And so there is this archival collection called the Board of Viewers that traces throughout the early years, the early decades of the 20th century. And so you can see with some of these photos here, you can kind of make a guess as to why these photos were taken. This flight of city steps on the south side, boy, that looks pretty darn dangerous. It's like really tilting over there. So this would be something that they would take a photo of before and after to show, once again, connecting with that city ordinance. This is the money that was approved for this work. Here's the before photo. Here is the after photo. And we also like to show the second photo that's here because this is also in the South Side Slopes. This shows a great example of a building, and in this case, it's a small market, a small grocery store. The photo is from 1940, that it does not have immediate street access. The only way you access this store is through the city steps. Matt, if you can point to where they are. Yeah. And this is something that in hilly neighborhoods like the South Side Slopes, also places like Hazelwood, this was very common. It was very common that because so many people lived in Pittsburgh, there was so much enterprise happening, and there were also a lot less building regulations than you have today. People were able to build houses and structures pretty much anywhere that they could get land, for better or for worse. Sometimes it was for worse, but in cases like this, this structure was right in the middle of the hillside, and the street is actually above it. And this is a street that actually still exists today. That the building is no longer there.
Yeah,
but
it still looks like this today. There's a street here and a street here.
Yeah.
Oh, those are two separate streets.
Yeah, there's a wall in between them.
Do they have a different names?
No, they're both Shelley Street in the South Side Slopes.
So as Matt mentioned earlier, one of the big reasons that after World War II, so many of the flights were constructed in concrete was because in all of the years when they were made out of wood, it became a hazard, right? Throughout the Depression, when times were tough, people did dismantle some of the stairs to use to heat their homes. If you couldn't afford coal and there were a flight of stairs down the street from your house, it was easy enough to rip up a couple of boards in the wintertime, right? Also, people got injured. As Matt mentioned, there were lawsuits against the city. But another thing that also happened, it's, so much today we often think, there's violence and crime. We hear about it on the news. Some of these back roads where the stairs are dangerous places. And that's not necessarily something that's just today. That throughout history, as we were doing research from the book, we found lots of newspaper articles about different kinds of crime, that happened. Often it was things such as purse snatching and mugging, disorderly conduct, people consuming alcohol and sitting around on the stairs. But this was a story that really grabbed our attention. And it really grabbed our attention because this was an unsolved crime that took place. This took place up on the north side in Woods Run, which is part of the Observatory Hill neighborhood. Perry North, Perry Park. Yeah, near Riverview Park in that whole area. And as you can see from some of the headlines, what had happened was this pretty Wood Runs girl was coming down the stairs. Her name was Coletta, and she was walking down this wooden flight of stairs, and as she stepped on one of the steps, a gun went off and it shot her in the leg, injuring her. Fortunately, there was someone nearby who heard the shot and then heard her cries and screams and everything, was able to call an ambulance, and they rushed her to the hospital. That's her photo right there. She seems to be doing okay. But when police were called and came to the scene, they actually found a couple of things that were very disturbing and that made this very newsworthy. The first thing that they discovered was that it was a handmade gun, which is why they called it a robot gun. It was that was the phrase that journalists were using at the time. And if you think this was in 1935, so robots at that time were still very super sci-fi. Like, what would this even be? But this was a self-constructed gun that had been attached somehow to the step, so that when Coletta stepped down, it prompted the trigger to go off. And in addition to finding this handmade gun there, the investigators also located a note, which Yeah, which they called in the newspaper, the journalists called the note a lunatic inventor. That he wrote this, that note that indicated this was just the first instance, that there would be more to come. And as Matt pointed out there, it says, ha ha, number one, which was etched nearby. And so this caused, at the time in 1935, it caused a considerable amount of fear. At this time, people are, they're riding the trolleys throughout Pittsburgh. They're walking. People are walking everywhere. So to think that there might be some lunatic inventor who has created robot guns and is hiding them under city steps, just waiting for you, to come and step on them, certainly, people got very, very concerned. But what surprised us was that after the initial mention of all of this, fortunately, Coletta healed up just fine and went on to live her life. There was never any further discussion of this crime. We could not find any other articles that talked about police locating the person who was responsible for this. But to the best of our knowledge, there was never another incident. So the person who had done this first one, who was threatening to do more, clearly was not able to take further action. But to the best of our knowledge, in searching through historical newspapers and online, we were never able to find out who the individual was that was behind this. We do guess that it was someone probably local to this particular flight of stairs, to the Woods Run area, but no name was ever brought to light. So unsolved mystery there.
And those are modern-day stairs. They do still exist in that spot.
Yes, the wooden stairs that Coletta stepped on in 1935 were replaced after the war, and now they look like the ones that are right there in that photo. So, as Matt had mentioned, the time of World War II brought about a great deal of funding to the city of Pittsburgh. So the years immediately following the war, up until like the mid-1950s, it was a time of enormous amounts of building. So city steps were being created into concrete, bridges were being repaired and built, streets were being paved. Sidewalks, which had primarily been boardwalks, they were made out of boards, before were also being put into concrete, and all kinds of building was taking place. And it must have been a really amazing, incredible time to be here in Pittsburgh, right? The war is done. Many loved ones, family members, servicemen and women have returned home. All of this construction, things are getting fixed. The steel mills are ramping back up to capacity. It just must have been a great amount of like happiness and excitement to be a Pittsburgher at that time. However, those times, the good times, would not last. And as many of you that have lived in this area your whole lives know, that as we start to come into the 1960s, 70s, and 80s, Pittsburgh's future and its finances really begin to change. So there are a few different things that contribute to all of this. So I like to start with the 1950s, which is the advent of the modern American highway system. So prior to the 1950s, there were plenty of roads, but we did not have the big highways that we think of today. Love them or hate them. They can be awful with traffic, but they can also make it very convenient and very fast to get from one place to another. So before the advent of the highways, the majority of the people, if you were working in a steel mill or any of the associated industries in Pittsburgh, you were living fairly close to your place of employment. And up through the 1940s, a very high percentage of people lived within a mile of the place where they worked. And a great many of those people walked to work. Some people in some neighborhoods who were maybe more white-collar workers might be able to afford a car, but an awful lot of the folks who were immigrants or manual laborers did not have the money to afford a car. And as a result, you were living close to the mill or the factory, and you were walking to work. So as the highways become constructed, this gave families the opportunity, especially after the war, to say, you know what, I don't have to have my family living in the middle of the city. You know, I can actually live out in one of these suburbs that rings the city, and I can get a car, and I can drive that new highway to my job. And this is something that started throughout the 50s and 60s to begin to lead to Pittsburgh's depopulation. As Matt mentioned at the very beginning, in the 1950 census, there were just about 700,000 people that lived within the 90 neighborhoods. The 90 neighborhoods of Pittsburgh, not Allegheny County, the 90 neighborhoods of Pittsburgh. And today, there's just a little over 300,000. So we lost almost 400,000 people after that 1950 census leading up to where we are today. So highways and suburbs are part of it. The second thing that would happen is that the steel industry would begin its exit of this area. The mills that used to line the Monongahela, the Ohio, and the Allegheny gradually, one by one, began to close. Environmental regulations changed, and that also prompted other industry to leave for places that were more deregulated in terms of their environmental pollutants, and things just really began to change. And this is the environment that this guy that you see here on the slide here, Bob Regan, discovered when he moved to Pittsburgh in the mid-1990s. So Bob came to Pittsburgh from Boston, Massachusetts, to teach in the School of Engineering at Pitt. At the time, Bob was working in this new technological field called geographical information systems. Now, that is something that we kind of take for granted today, right? Anytime you see a map that has interesting data or some sort of a story attached to it, whether it's on TV or the internet, you can thank geographical information systems for that. It powers so much of our mapping information that we see online today. But in the mid-1990s, this was all fairly new stuff. And this was the discipline that Bob worked in, and this was how he got hired at Pitt. So Bob is new to the city of Pittsburgh. He was an avid, and still is, Bob's still alive, and he is still an avid cyclist. So to get to know his new city, he'd get on his bike and just kind of travel all over the place. And it was through those travels that he started to see these city steps. Now, Boston is a relatively flat oceanfront city. So when he saw these public stairs, he also realized that they were streets. And he thought to himself, now this is a really interesting mapping research question, because today in the modern era, most people think of streets as a car or a vehicle is on it. But here in Pittsburgh, they have streets that are city steps. This sounds interesting. So he starts making phone calls around city government, trying to get a map of where all of the city steps are located. Now, in the late 1990s, Pittsburgh was having one of its worst economic decades ever. The early part of the 90s had seen public pools be closed, parks were severely uncared for, roads were a mess, municipal workers were being laid off. The 90s were a really, really tough time in Pittsburgh. So as Bob is calling around looking for information, he's told time and time again, we're so sorry, Professor Regan, we can't help you. Like, we don't even have any maps. Like, you know, maybe call Public Works. Maybe some of the guys there help you. Or maybe go to the library and look at some of those Sanborn fire insurance maps that we showed here on the slide from the earlier part of the century. Maybe the Heinz History Center can help you out. So Bob was not deterred. He was like, okay, if this is, you know, it's going to be a little more challenging, that's all right. You know, I can do that. So he did. He started doing that research, but he also continued to get on his bike and biked all over the 90 neighborhoods. And in the years that he was doing that, every time he would find a flight of city steps, being the engineer and the researcher, he'd get out and make detailed notes about where the stairs were located, how long they were, how they were constructed, start and end points, all kinds of rich and robust information that he was going to need to make his maps. Now, as a result of Bob going out and doing this, the word started getting out about, like, there's this crazy engineering guy from Boston who's in Pittsburgh, and he's riding his bike all over the place, and he wants to know about the city steps. So one person to the next, and people start talking, and before you know it, people are coming up to Bob, they're calling him, they're sending him emails. Oh, you got to find city steps there. Oh, I grew up in this neighborhood. You got to look there. You got to get there. And he starts to become kind of like this very popular guy around town. And as a result of all of this work and popularity, people say, you know, you got to write a book about this, Bob. You know, we love the city steps here in Pittsburgh, and nobody's talked about them for years. You know, you got to do this. You're the guy. You're doing all the work. And so that was what Bob did. He actually wrote the first book, which is the black and white cover one, The Steps of Pittsburgh, Portrait of a City, came out in the early 2000s. And then the second book, which is Pittsburgh Steps, was a reprint of that original, came out about 10 years later. The thing that was really nice, I own both books, and I'm sure by seeing a lot of you smiling and nodding, I have a feeling there's a bunch of you here in the audience that have these books as well. The thing that I really love about the book with the color copy, the color cover, is that it contains the list of where all the stairs were. So Bob essentially recreated his journey that other people could follow, because at that time, there were no online maps. If you wanted to find out where the stairs were, these books were it. And that is the book that I discovered when I moved here in 2015, living in a neighborhood that has a lot of city steps. And when I found this book, I said to myself, oh my Lord, I can't even believe it's not just my neighborhood. They are all over this city. And that set me on my journey of saying, well, I'm new here to this city. I'm going to go out. I'm going to follow Bob Regan's journey. His entire journey is like right in the back of the book. I'm going to start with the first one, and I'm just going to continue on and on and on. And that was what I did. And over the years of doing that, I got to be friends with Bob. And as I began to come to the closing point of visiting all 739 flights of stairs that Bob found, we realized that it was the time to create a new book. And fortunately, Matt here was someone that had been working for the city of Pittsburgh, taking Bob's data, not taking it with his permission, but using all of his data to create the online maps that are available now. So today, for people who want to find the city steps, whether just because they love them for the history or they're trying to plan a walk, there are all sorts of online City of Pittsburgh resources that Matt was in hand responsible for creating that are available. But we would not have any of that today were it not for Bob's tenacity of cycling and traveling all over Pittsburgh throughout the late 1990s. And Bob is still alive. He's in his late 80s at this point. He still teaches one class a year at Pitt in the School of Engineering. And if you look online, he always has great reviews as a professor. So some interesting little facts here about the city steps, and that is always kind of fun and curious. Pittsburgh actually has 344 legal streets that are flights of stairs. As I said, this was the thing that captured Bob Regan's interest initially, and it is something that I even remember when I first moved here, trying to learn my way around and using my GPS. Even at that time, GPS was not robust enough to say, like, wait, no, you can't take a left onto Yard Way. That's actually a flight of stairs. Today, fortunately, GPS is at such that you can, put in your travel modality, and it will give you directions whether you're walking or traveling in a car or taking the bus. But yeah, that's 344 legal streets. And those are all often very historic streets. When you look at the old maps from 100 years ago, those flights of city steps have been around for a very, very long time. There's also still almost 190 or so wooden stairways that are around the city. If you happen to find them, don't get excited thinking you found something from the 1800s. You have not. There are no wooden steps from that initial period of construction that still exist. However, wood is still a very affordable and quick building mechanism and methodology for public works. So there are still plenty of neighborhoods that need small flights of city steps. And when those need to be built or repaired, they are often made out of wood. Many of the other flights of city steps, including sidewalk stairs, are made in concrete. And on this slide here is an example from Greenfield. This is a newer flight of sidewalk stairs. And Matt, if you could just point out where the bike runnel is located.
Kind of looks like a little curve.
Yeah.
It's running up the side here.
So one of the things that's new in kind of like the new city stairs when they're rebuilt or constructed is that, today there are lots of folks, especially in residential neighborhoods, that want to be able to ride their bikes around Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh every year gets more and more miles of bike lanes, which is a wonderful, environmentally friendly way for people to get around the city. But particularly in residential neighborhoods and hilly ones like Greenfield, having runnels built into the city steps just makes it a little easier to move your bike up and down the hill. Now, it's important to note that with a runnel, you are dismounting your bike and you are walking it up or down. I'm sure there's some kid in Greenfield that has tried to ride his or her bike down on the runnel. Maybe they made it to the bottom okay, maybe not. But I always like to say to people, like, the runnels are really great, especially if you're a cyclist and you're going through these neighborhoods. However, please do not ride your bike on them. So Pittsburgh really does have miles and miles of stairs, and the South Side Slopes is the neighborhood that has the most. They have 68 flights with somewhere in the ballpark of 5,400 steps. Now, that is interesting because if we think back to those Indian Trail stairs that we saw earlier in the presentation, those were 1,000 steps. So this is certainly more than that, but this is an entire neighborhood and all of the city steps that are there. Now, the South Side Slopes was originally a neighborhood that was very densely populated with mill workers and their families. And this is because the South Side Slopes is right above South Side Flats, which is on the Monongahela River. And that area throughout the 1800s, well into the 1900s, had lots and lots of industry along the rivers. More recently, it was the steel industry. But going back into the 1800s, iron was produced there, as well as the fine glass industry, which which was really a very key point of the South Side Slopes, then called Birmingham. It was a separate municipality for a good chunk of the 1800s, but fine glassware was made in that area. So throughout Pittsburgh's era of depopulation, many, many neighborhoods suffered considerably. The South Side Slopes is one neighborhood that certainly lost population, but not as many people because it maintained a certain level of popularity with young professionals, college students, and anyone interested in the East Carson Street nightlife scene, which has been very vibrant for some time now, as well as all of the new shopping and movie theaters and things like that that are a part of the new riverfront area with its bike trails and hiking paths and boating and all kinds of things. Living in the South Side Slopes makes it very easy to access all of that great newish stuff that's in the area now. However, one thing that about City Steps that makes the South Side Slopes unique is that every fall, and this has happened now for 25 years, the South Side Slopes Neighborhood Association on the first Saturday in October hosts its annual Step Trek fundraiser. This was first started when Tom Murphy was mayor of Pittsburgh. He was the honorary champion stair stepper, leading tours, walking all throughout the neighborhood. And it's been incredibly popular ever since. Some years it attracts thousands of people, especially if the weather is nice. And it's a lot of fun. They put together 2 different self-guided walking tours. One is black, one is gold, because it's Pittsburgh. And then people get their maps and they they go out and they walk all over the neighborhood, up and down. And sometimes they have little live music stations and parks and pop-ups for food and drink and all kinds of stuff. And it's an awful lot of fun. Also, before I move on to the next slide, just keep in your mind the purple house that is on that flight of stairs there. That is an orphan house, and we're going to talk more about that on this slide. So orphan houses are something like, if you remember back to the beginning of the presentation with the city archives photo of the little grocery store that was only available by City Steps, right? That was not a rarity, right? That was not unique. All over the city, there were lots and lots of both commercial buildings as well as homes that were only accessible by the City Steps. And that seems a little strange to us today, but remember, those City Steps were actually streets. So it wasn't that you didn't have street access. Well, your street was a flight of stairs, right? It's only today in our modern mind that our definition of a street is something that we can have a car or a vehicle on, right? 100+ years ago, before all of that, there was streets and there were steps, but they were both the same thing. So the fact that your house was on a flight of stairs was not any sort of deal breaker or problem. That only became highlighted as we come into the modern times, when cars become, everybody needs to have a car, everybody wants to have a car, and as Pittsburgh starts to lose its population. As Pittsburgh loses its population, oftentimes these houses became abandoned. And you can imagine the scenario, right? So it's, the 1980s, the 1990s, families have lived here for generations, but the kids have grown up, they've gone to college, they can't find a job here. So they move away. Maybe they go to Cleveland or Brooklyn or DC. And then Grandma dies. She's lived in this house all of her life. She was born in that house. But now, nobody is like, I can't move to Pittsburgh. The house has no value. Nobody wants to live in an old house that's on a flight of City Steps. Where am I going to park my car? Where's the street? How am I going to get deliveries? Where are my mail? So what's happened over time is that these houses have become abandoned. Families walked away from them. And then in time, the city makes the decision to demolish them because taxes haven't been paid. They become a nuisance and, all sorts of things. So the orphan houses were something that is really a part of Pittsburgh's past when there were so many people here and before automobiles were ubiquitous. So this screenshot that I'm showing here on this particular slide is a really interesting one to see because it's taken from Google Street View, the street capture. So for those of you also that like doing historical research, remember, even in the last 20 years, that's still historical. Since 2007, Google in the Google Maps Street View has been driving all around the city doing street view captures. And this tool provides really great information about what has happened to Pittsburgh on a street level since 2007, which is really incredible. The amount of change that's happened here in the city in the last 20 years is really pretty astounding. So here, this is a street view capture on the north side, California Kirkbride. It's Lamont Street. It's from 2011. And you see here, there's an old house, an old flight of wooden stairs that's going down. You think like, oh, that looks like, it's pastoral, country living. Like, doesn't that look so nice, right? Well, if you went back and you looked on the historical maps, you would see that in the 1920s, yes, there was a flight of stairs there, but there were houses on either side, right? California Kirkbride was a densely packed neighborhood. It was so close to industry. And so it wasn't just one house on a green hillside. It was many houses, one after another, on a hillside that had been stripped of trees. But by 2011, the only one that's remaining is this one. And if you were to go out there today, you wouldn't see any of it. You would think, oh, this is just this nice green, lush hillside in California Kirkbride, so close to the city. And that is because in 2012, the last remaining house and the stairs, it was demolished. And you can see that by using the Street View capture on Google Maps. It's a really fantastic resource, especially if oftentimes you're thinking like, I could have swore there used to be something on that street, 10 years ago, 20 years ago. That does not exist today. By looking at Street View, you can often see the things that used to exist that don't exist any longer. And so on that note, I'm going to hand it back to Matt.
All right. So we covered, the past and the more modern day history of the steps. And so now we're going to talk more about the current day state of the city steps. So this picture is a set of city steps that we all like quite a bit and we all enjoy to talk about. These are the rising Main Avenue steps in the Fineview neighborhood of Pittsburgh, which is on the north side. This picture is actually taken from across I-79, I-279 in Spring Hill, so across the highway there on a different hillside. And these are such a large set of steps, they're hard to get in one picture. You can't see the bottom and you can barely see the top. The top of the steps is the Fineview neighborhood, which is very residential. And then a reason that we like talking about these steps is not only that they're one of the more dramatic sets of steps in the city, but they're really emblematic of a lot of the themes that we've talked about so far in this presentation. So for one, these steps were originally built at a much different time. They were reconstructed at a different time in the city's history. And when they were built, they served a much more practical purpose. So when they were constructed, at the bottom was another densely populated residential neighborhood called the East Street Valley. Today, that neighborhood is gone. It was essentially destroyed in order to make I-279 the highway that connects up to Cranberry. These homes at the bottom, only a few of them are occupied. There is a water pumping station down here that pumps water up the hill, hence the name Rising Main. But that's basically all that is down there anymore. So these steps, which are massive and would cost a lot of money to reconstruct, and as you can see, they are starting to show some wear and tear. They're crooked, even though they're built out of concrete, because the hillside is going different directions. These steps would cost an astronomical amount of money to repair, and they really do not serve that purpose anymore of a mode of transportation, essentially. If anything, the thing that they're mainly used for anymore is recreation, people training for, I don't know, hiking a mountain or something. They're also on the Fine View Step Race, which is a race in Fine View that has 2 routes, an easy and a hard route. These are on the hard route. I don't think the easy route would be that easy either, but I mean, these are the hard route. So they do have some purpose anymore, but it would be hard to justify reconstructing them with the amount of money that they would cost to reconstruct. However, the city is still reconstructing stairs, so this is an example of that. This is Copperfield Avenue in Carrick. This is one of the steepest streets in the city at a 23% grade. It is not the steepest street. That is Canton Avenue over in Beachview, both southern neighborhoods in the city. As you can see here on the left-hand side, these steps were constructed in brick, and they ran up multiple blocks of this street on both sides. And they had small sets of steps, too, that connected up to people's homes. In addition to that, there are these storm culverts made out of brick and these little tiny, it's hard to see, but little tiny footbridges that went over the culvert from the steps to take you to your car or so that you could take out your garbage. These weren't the most aesthetically pleasing steps, and nor were they in good condition after a certain amount of time. And so they did get reconstructed here, similar to the steps we saw in a previous slide. And they reconstructed all 6 sets running up the street on both sides in concrete. And so when we talk about the decisions that the city has to make in terms of reconstructing steps, again, keep in mind what we talked about earlier. One, the steps were built at a different time where the use of the steps was more a necessity. In addition to that, they were built at a time when the city had twice the tax base that it does now, basically. So the city maintains a lot of the same amount of infrastructure, but with half the tax base that was around when it was originally built. So it makes it a lot more difficult to find the money to reconstruct them. And therefore, decisions have to be made as to how to prioritize all of these sets of steps. And so when I was at the city, we worked with internally as well as a consultant to do a city steps survey. That survey included Bob's data of all the steps that he mapped, including some more steps that we actually discovered after Bob did all that mapping of nearly 750 steps. There were still more. And in addition to that, we combined that with various other data points. So for instance, it was combined with data such as the bus stops. The Port Authority tracks how many people get on and off at each bus stop on a daily basis. And so the assumption was, if a set of steps is near a very busy bus stop, they probably get more use than others. Additionally, we combine that with proximity to schools, assuming school children walk to school more frequently than others, perhaps. And finally, each set of steps was given what was called a detour score. And so that score essentially said if these steps were not here and you had to walk from where they start and where they end, how much longer would it take? And so the longer it took, the higher the score. And combining all that data and then also looking, what steps were given the most priority to be reconstructed, but then also going and looking at the condition of those steps. If they were in decent condition, they weren't just rebuilt because they had a high score. So one of those sets of steps that was one of those candidates is this set of steps, the Vista Street stairs in the north side. And this is an old photo of the steps. And you can see here, there's a sign across the steps that says steps closed. The city will often put that on a set of steps, even if they're maybe in okay condition, just to, I think, get rid of any liability if someone decides to step over that sign and hurt themselves.
Engineering, licensure, and all kinds of things,
Or they'll just weld metal bars across the entrances sometimes as well. And then these are the new sets of steps that were reconstructed. And the one thing I forgot to mention also is we did all that work and then COVID happened. Everything stopped. The silver lining of COVID was kind of much like after World War II, lots of federal funding came along, and we had all this data ready to go to reconstruct steps. So it was definitely a silver lining to all of that, where we received a lot of federal funding that made it that the city could reconstruct far more steps than they ever do in a typical year. They do still reconstruct steps without that federal funding, just not nearly as much. And so this new construction here, you can see the mural was transferred over to the new set of steps. This is a mosaic tile mural made by a local artist. Many of the sets of steps have public art on them, both sanctioned and unsanctioned. So lots of graffiti. And then you can see here the railing. There's no gaps in the railing anymore. It's kind of like a mesh metal material. There is a bike runnel on the side here, and there is solar-powered LED lighting as well. So the city is still reconstructing stairs, but just not as much as it was in the past. But that is the current state of the steps. And so with that, we are going to take questions.
Stairs, yeah. On that particular, it looks like the direction of the stairs changed as well, did it?
Maybe slightly. The bottom kind of zigzagged a little bit at the bottom on the original, yeah. And
Yeah,
so
because it looks like there's the platform, and
Yeah.
then from the platform it goes straight up.
yeah, I think it
But
kind
on
of
this one,
changed
there's the
ever so
platform that
slightly,
goes,
yeah. Yeah. Ready?
Did they have like a street lights on the side?
Some do. Not all the steps do, but there are many steps out there that do have street lights. They actually had gas lamps at a time. We did find a lot of, in our study or research, we found a lot of good information on the steps from the gas lamp lighting projects that happened
Yes.
back in the day.
In fact,
so.
one of the, because we found an ordinance for this, one of the first gas lamps that was installed was to support a flight of stairs. And it was over in Soho, which is the neighborhood where Duquesne University is now. So yeah, that was the days of the gas lamps.
Are all the steps you're talking about in the city limits? Are there any outside?
Yes, there are, and we did not branch out into the other boroughs and municipalities because it's kind of like, where do you stop? So we did stay within the city limits, but Millvale, Bellevue, Homestead, all have municipal stairways as well, and I'm sure there's many more that
All the
I'm
way
not,
out to Johnstown.
Yeah,
There are city
yeah.
steps there, some really big flights, built for similar reasons of why they were built here.
Yeah,
in
and there are
Pittsburgh.
the cities that have a lot. Cincinnati has about 300 to 400 sets of city steps. San Francisco, Seattle, et cetera.
So are the steps maintained, or are they they're just there until they
They are
disintegrate?
maintained. The city of Pittsburgh has a division within Public Works called the Construction Division that they do minor repairs on the steps. So if like a tread is missing, they replace a tread. They actually pour the concrete forms at a building. And then, because most of the steps are the same dimensions, these concrete steps, so they pour the treads, bring a tread out, pop the old one out, pop a new one in. The wooden steps that we showed are built in-house by carpenters at the city, and they still do that. And we actually had one attend one of our talks, and at the way end, he revealed himself.
It was great.
But he was like, yeah, I built those steps. So, it's pretty cool. So I know we had a question back here.
Has anyone ever studied usage?
So when we talked about that survey, we try to figure out usage of the steps, but with so many of them, and the other problem is that at the time, at least, kind of tracking data for pedestrians was really hard to get that data. So a lot of it had to, like I was saying, had to be assumptions that were made, such as proximity to public transit, right? People have to walk to take a bus. So if they're near public transit that's busy, it's assumed that they are more heavily used. But as far as I'm aware, there isn't like a pedestrian count for every set of steps that are out there. In fact, sometimes the best way you can tell usage is in the winter because you can see all the footprints in the snow. But other than that, there's not really great data on that.
Are they maintained in the wintertime?
Some are, not all of them. Some have a salt box placed by them by the city where it's, they just fill it with rock salt so that the neighbors can go clear it off. When I was at the city, we did look into what it would take to try to clear every set of steps as well as every sidewalk the city owns. The total length of all of that is the height of Mount Everest, so it would be a lot. Yeah.
For this study you did, or for this book, in order for the steps to be part of this study, did they have to be a certain amount, like a significant number of steps? Because there are a lot of sets in the city where there's 15 steps maybe.
Oh, yeah, no.
Are those all considered?
All the steps that we referred to, including Bob's count when we said like the 730, those could include sets of steps that are literally 2 steps.
Yeah. Yep. And
they
there
were
are places
included,
where
yeah.
it's just 1 or 2. If it just helps
Like a
to,
corner.
Yeah, if it just
like
helps
going up
the
a hill
person to navigate
on
the
a
incline.
sidewalk.
Yeah, you had one photo there that had like 2 photos. One that had like a lot of steps, and then the other one was coming from the street, and it was like a platform, 3 or 4 steps,
Yep.
and that
It's
was it.
pretty-
So
pretty
that
common.
counts as a.
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay.
Because if you didn't have the stairs there and it was just a regular incline, you think about going down or going up, when it's icy conditions or when it's wet, even though the stairs are not easy, it's easier than just going on a straight incline.
Are there any private steps?
So, we didn't include, of course, like private steps, let's say on, like Pitt's campus or something, right, where they might have stairways. There are sets of city steps that the neighbors don't want them, and they've tried to argue that they are privately owned so that they can close them or keep them, like, not totally closed, but people would be considered trespassing if they're on them. So there are a handful of those throughout the city. Some that are recently were in litigation for that reason.
I remember when I worked at the hospital, the Veterans Hospital, there's a set of steps that went from center up.
Yeah.
And I remember they were maintaining them, and we couldn't go up them for a while, but.
They're still there,
That was a nice.
Yeah, those are still
nice.
there, and those are some
Those are the
more-
stone slab ones.
Yeah.
Flights like that were created with WPA funding during the Great Depression. So any of the flights that you see that are made out of these wide, like granite slabs with, like the beautiful cut stone retaining walls along the side, they were constructed during that time for the most part.
And the steps I'm talking about, or those?
Off of Center Ave that go up towards where the school is, right? The high school.
No, it went up to the Veterans Hospital, up in those areas.
Yeah, they are still, there's a set there, and there's one on the other side of the street as well, or on both sides, yeah.
When I first moved back to Pittsburgh in the, ancient times, my brother and his family lived in Oakland, the Hollow.
Yes.
And there was a set of steps that went up, and I worked at Pitt for a short time. And I walked from the Hollow up those steps every day. Up and down.
I bet that's John
could
Kerr
be
Street
John
behind
Kerr.
Frick Fine Arts.
And there's also Diulis.
Oh,
Way.
Diulis. Yes.
And
Yeah,
those
that
are
was
still
the
there.
family name.
Yes,
Yeah.
okay.
Yep, those
Yeah.
are still there.
Oh,
We
okay.
have those in the book, and those have many orphan homes on them as well, where
Yes.
the only connection is the city
Okay.
steps.
I don't remember any.
Yeah.
I don't know, maybe because I was gasping for air or something. I remember trees and I remember
times.
steps. And I got in better shape, but I know in the beginning I was holding on to the
Like,
rim.
what am I doing working here?
I was in my 20s. It was okay. I survived. Yeah.
Do a lot of people have heart attacks on these steps?
I don't know if we've found that, or we've found some stories of people falling on them, dying on them, but not sure if it was cardiac arrest. It was like maybe someone was drunk and fell off. I don't know. So we did find some of those stories, but I also told people, like, when people complain to the city about the steps, they don't always specify like where the issue is. And when I was there, I'd drive out with the guy, I had to go look, and he was like, they didn't say where it is, and we pull up and, you know, it's like 200 steps and he has to walk the whole thing to go look where the issue is. So he got his workouts in for sure.
So Pittsburgh has bragging rights with bridges.
Yes.
Do we have bragging rights with steps?
As far as we know, yes, absolutely. Definitely the most in the United States. I'm sure there's cities all over the world that have lots of steps, but maybe they haven't documented it quite as well that we can, we have the proof. But definitely within the United States, we would say that Pittsburgh has the most. Yeah.
Okay.
Did you have a question? Did you?
Yeah, I was just curious about how they originally started. Like, did the city decide where they should be, or were they already footpaths, so they decided, oh, let's just put stairs there?
Probably a combination of both, I would say. There's steps that go that are on maps back to the 1860s, 1870s, and they're still there today in some places. And so, and then we found a lot of documentation before there was like 311 where people could complain to the city. They more complained in the newspaper, and they would be like, we need steps here because we have kids walking to school who it would make it a lot easier for them to get to and from. So it could be any variety of things.
The thing that's interesting about the stairs too is that it shows this time of how the role of government changes. And it's not just here for Pittsburgh, it's all over the place where, other cities, other municipalities, where the city starts to get into the business of building the stairs because the owners of the mills of industry want it. They need it because they need a reliable way to get workers there. And before the stairs, like if you had, you have all this industry along the river, there's only so much space. And back then, this is, before, you had water and sewer and whatnot. Very few people wanted to live in the flats near the rivers, right? Everyone is moving up. But if there's no easy way to get people from up here to down here, or not a less reliable way, you as the, industry as like, oh, this is a problem. So that is something that like when we see with the ordinances, the early stairs being built in Soho, where Duquesne is now, going down to the river, kind of near where the Armstrong Tunnel is today. That was at a time when there was industry lining that whole river, as well as we see a lot of documentation after Pittsburgh annexed the south side. So Birmingham and all those municipalities, all of a sudden in the ordinances, you see like Yard Way, right? One that is still around today, Josephine Street, South 18th Street, all of these start to get approved in the late 1800s and constructed. So that is something, while we don't have like hard documentation that says, oh, the guy that owned this is asking for this and we agree to it, you kind of have to look at the period of time and what's going along with it and say like, okay, this is part of, government and industry beginning its uneasy dance, which we still have today.
Yeah, growing up in the Pittsburgh area, I would hear stories on occasion that police would try to respond and they would end up at a street and it was steps. Is that still an issue? Has that been taken care of with Google?
So like for instance today, the routing is better. If you were to do Google directions, walking directions, they're pretty good about knowing the steps and how that could be taken into account. Bob's book had some stories of bicycle police chasing people down the steps and like riding their bikes down them. So if you go look at his book.
I don't know if Pittsburgh police still has bike officers for the stairs. Okay, all right. Because I know they're downtown.
How do departments respond?
How do other departments respond?
Fire departments.
That's a good question. I mean, I'm sure they have to manage. I mean, there's probably, in many cases, a fire hydrant at the top of the steps. And if something were to happen, they'd have to use the steps. That has happened in some other places. I know some abandoned homes caught fire and the steps were also abandoned and the firefighters had a lot of difficulty getting there because that was about the only access. And I mean, a lot of roads in Pittsburgh are hard enough for the fire department, right? They have to have small fire trucks for a lot of these roads to get them back there, so.
I lived in the city, and one day there was something in Shelby Park.
Yeah.
Below the bridge. And I was watching, the fire department didn't know how to get down there.
Yeah, oh yeah, I mean, so it's, yeah, it can still be a challenge, and it probably relies a lot on just them having, there has to be some guy who works within the department who has that knowledge, you know? And
That's pretty, those houses are really pretty.
there's a question back here, yeah.
You brought back a member that I'd forgotten for 50 years. But St. John's Hospital on the north side was on McClure. Nurses' residence was on Fleming. There was a set of steps that went up to California Avenue. And I wonder if they're still there.
I can, if you want to, I'll check after, and because I bet they are. I just need to like pull up.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure, yeah.
Look that up too on
Yeah.
Google Maps.
Yes,
you
on
can do
Google
that.
Maps.
There is the steps map online. So if you go to the City of Pittsburgh, it's called the City of Pittsburgh GIS department is where all their maps are. So there would be a map of the city steps there as well. But we can also look after the presentation. So I'm pretty sure they are there. And we could take a couple more questions.
On your map that shows all of the steps, one of the first maps, there are long segments of straight, whatever they are, steps or paths, or what are they?
So those segments, those red lines, all are representing a set of city
But they were
steps.
extraordinarily long.
That could be because they follow like their sidewalk steps on a street. So it might be like a pretty straight road, but they go pretty far. So like for instance, Sterling Street in the South Side Slopes is an example of that. And Yardway that we showed is straight. It's a straight shot for a long time. Yeah.
Lines there.
So a lot of these do like
Or are they
these.
just
This is probably. It's hard to say, but one of these would be Sterling Street, and this is probably Yardway over here, and this is probably Sterling. But yeah, they go very, very far in a straight line. Same with like Lap Lane over here in the north side goes quite far.
Crossing multiple city blocks, so there's streets that intersect.
It could be like
with
six blocks of
But
city
they have
steps.
steps, they're not just sidewalks.
Correct.
No, they're steps, yeah. Often those 344 street legal stairs, those tend to be longer flights.
Yeah.
So,
And then the last slide, there's questions. That's Sunday Street in the north
Yep,
side.
back to the end. Zip over.
And so this home,
there you go.
that was recently on the market. But yeah, this is Sunday Street, and so that is in the California Kirkbride neighborhood, and this is taken from Manchester. And then there's a set of steps here. They actually go up around the corner, and there's another set that goes down this way. But yeah, beautiful house there. It was on the market recently for like $400,000. So
Is that considered an historic?
I don't know if it's historically designated. I know the Mexican War Streets, which is kind of close, but not next to this necessarily, do have rules around how your homes can
Where
look.
is that located, Rick, this picture?
Sunday Street, north side.
Okay.
Yeah. So
It's
it was
right in
recently
back
in the news.
of Uniondale Cemetery.
yeah.
If you look up to the top, that's Uniondale
That's the
Cemetery
cemetery.
right above. Yeah.
And this was recently in the news because a tractor trailer got stuck on the street there. So
During a snowstorm, and it was icy.
how many of our steps end up getting destroyed as well, our vehicles. So, but with that, we'll hang out anyways for some more questions. We do want to mention that the book is, of course, available at the libraries. It is available online, local bookstores. Also, keep an eye out. We are coming out with a new book anticipated in the spring of next year about the parks, playgrounds, and trails of the city of Pittsburgh. So that is our next book. So thank you all for being here. And like I said, we'll hang out for questions.
Thank you.